In a time when history was marked by great heroes of faith, names like Moses, David, and Samuel, there existed a woman without great renown, but who, through her devotion and faith, will become an example for generations. She was not called to a leadership position or an epic battle. On the contrary, Hannah was a simple woman, a woman whose name was almost forgotten, but whose story carries lessons of perseverance, unwavering faith, and, above all, transformative silence. Hannah lived in Israel, a country that, like many others of the time, was deeply influenced by religion and the laws that governed daily life. She was the wife of Elkanah, a man from the tribe of Ephraim. But her story is not marked by great military or political achievements. In fact, Hannah was a seemingly ordinary woman, but with deep suffering. She was barren. In those days, barrenness was considered a curse, a punishment from God. A woman who could not bear children, especially male children, was socially stigmatized. For Hannah, the burden of infertility was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. She felt she wasn't fulfilling her role as a woman and wife. Society's expectations weighed heavily on her, and the lack of children became a daily burden. But Hannah's pain was even sharper for one reason. Peninnah, Elkanah's other wife, had children. Peninnah never missed an opportunity to mock Hannah, to make her feel even more inadequate and empty. The rivalry between the two women became a constant source of pain for Hannah, but she didn't give in to anger. Instead, she retreated to prayer, seeking comfort and strength in the only place she found peace, before God. Hannah's anguish led her to a profound inner silence. She spent days in lament, but without rebelling. In her soul, a silent cry echoed, a fervent prayer that didn't need words, but carried the full weight of her pain. Hannah wasn't looking for human help, but for something much greater. She knew that only God could answer her distress, and it was in a moment of great despair and pain that Hannah made a vow. She went up to the temple in Shiloh, where the priest Eli served, and there, in the holy place, she did something extraordinary. She prayed fervently, with tears streaming down her face. Hannah didn't just ask for a child, but for a child for God. She made a vow. If the Lord gives me a son, I will give him back to him for his entire life. He will be dedicated to the Lord, and no razor will ever touch his head. This prayer was an act of faith, but also of surrender. Hannah wasn't just seeking a child for a personal fulfillment. She wanted the child to be used for God's glory. It was a deep and sincere request, and more than that, it was a promise of radical obedience to divine will. Hannah wasn't just looking for an answer to her suffering, but a divine mission for her son. Upon hearing Hannah's prayer, Eli, the priest, initially mistook her for a drunken woman. He saw her praying in silence, her lips moving, but without uttering any sound. Instead of rebuking her, Hannah, with all humility, explained, "I am not a wicked woman, but I am praying with a heart full of bitterness and sorrow." Eli, touched by the woman's sincerity and faith, blessed her and said, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you've asked." In that moment, Hannah believed in Eli's word, and with renewed faith, she left, knowing that God would answer her prayer in his perfect time. And the grace of God manifested. Hannah conceived a son, and she named him Samuel, which means heard by God. Samuel's name wasn't just a common name. It was a constant reminder that God heard the cry of a woman who, for a long time, had been silenced by society and the circumstances of her life. Samuel was not only a fulfillment of promise, but a living testimony that God hears prayers offered in silence, that he doesn't ignore those who seek his face with genuine faith. When Samuel reached the appropriate age, Hannah fulfilled the promise she had made to God. She took the boy to the temple in Shiloh and delivered him to Eli, the priest, with a heart full of gratitude, but also pain. Hannah was placing her son in God's hands, but she was also fulfilling a greater purpose that she herself couldn't fully comprehend. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him, Hannah said. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be given over to the Lord. Hannah wasn't just giving up Samuel. She was also giving up her own pain and hope, showing that her trust in God was greater than any earthly bond. She believed that Samuel had an eternal destiny, that her son would be used by God in a way far greater than she could have ever dreamed. And Samuel, the promised boy, grew up before the Lord. He became the great prophet who would anoint the kings of Israel, including David, and who would play a fundamental role in the history of Israel. Hannah's story doesn't end with Samuel's dedication. In fact, it expands even further. The Bible tells us that after fulfilling her promise, God blessed Hannah with more children. She had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and her life was marked by deep joy. But the greatest gift of all was a legacy of faith, perseverance, and surrender she left behind. Hannah became known for her devotion and faith, and her story spread as an example of how God can transform silence into an echo of faith. Hannah's life teaches us that even in the midst of pain, God is listening to our prayers. She wasn't just Samuel's mother, but also the mother of fulfilled promise, a symbol of the power of faith, trust in God, and complete surrender to his will. Hannah, the prophetess, teaches us that silence before God is never in vain. Sometimes we feel our prayers aren't heard, that our pain is ignored, but Hannah's story reminds us that silence is a space where God works. Every tear, every silent prayer, every moment of solitude is heard by the one who knows all hearts. The silence that sometimes feels heavy and painful can, in fact, be the ground where God prepares something grand in our lives. Hannah, the prophetess, teaches us that silence before God is never in vain. Sometimes we feel our prayers aren't heard, that our pain is ignored, but Hannah's story reminds us that silence is a space where God works. Every tear, every silent prayer, every moment of solitude is heard by the one who knows all hearts. The silence that sometimes feels heavy and painful can, in fact, be the ground where God prepares something grand in our lives. May we learn from Hannah to trust fully in God, especially in moments of suffering, when hope seems distant and pain feels unbearable. Her story teaches us that even in silence, God hears us and sees our hearts. Just as Hannah entrusted her son Samuel into God's hands, may we also surrender our lives, our dreams, and our plans, knowing that he is the one who best orchestrates our destiny in ways only he can. And even when the answer doesn't come the way we imagine, may we remember that the greatest gift of all is to be at the center of God's will. Because, like Hannah, when we surrender completely, we see the fulfillment of his plans, which are much greater and grander than we can comprehend. If you were inspired by Hannah's story, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and don't miss the next videos. Share this message of faith and trust with those you love. See you in the next video. God bless everyone.